Hello. Today I have Jennifer Hambrick and Richard Gilbert, and we came across something that I thought would be interesting because collaboration is part of Haikai. It's part of the way we operate on every level with linked verse, with Hoku, with Taiga, and in their case, haibun. And we don't often see it as much in haibun as we do in other parts of the genre, but they've done a marvelous job of it. They've done it a couple of times now. They've been published, and they're very good. And I was surprised when I first looked at them at how they managed to put both of themselves into it in a way that, if you're reading it, it's seamless. They could have put either one of their names on and forgot the other, and it would have worked. So uh, that kind of seamless collaboration is sort of cool. And what I want them to do is tell us how they came up with the idea, how they executed on it, and what, if any, problems they had uh, in going back and forth. What's the process part of it work? How do I make it work for me? Let them give me the examples. Do you want me to put up the one from Rattle first, or do you want to talk first about process?
Um, oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know, Richard, what do you think? Where would you like?
Well, I think you're going to go first. So your choice.
My choice? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, we can definitely put up Disaster Wireless. That's a
Right.
high that Richard and I collaborated on. We wrote collaboratively, I'll say, and it was published in Rattle. Um, it looks like Rattle number 83 from spring of 2024. And I'll say just a few words kind of while you're putting that up about how this haibun came about. So first of all, I live in Columbus, Ohio, and Richard lives in Kumamoto, Japan. So we're thousands of miles away, and we about a year or so ago were emailing back and forth about various poetry related things and also just some kind of friendly things and in one message Richard was writing about the woods that he has around his house. And Richard, I'll let you fill in the details about the woods because you speak so beautifully and so lovingly about these woods. But just to suffice it to say for now, this message that he sent me, where he was just kind of telling me about these woods that he tends around his house, I was reading the message and I got to this part about the woods, and suddenly I felt like what he was writing about the woods, the words that he had written about the woods, literally were warm and glowing up off the page. I've never had this experience in a text that I had been reading, particularly an email text, which I mean, I think generally when we write emails, we're pretty practical, about it. We reach for fairly workaday language, and there are good reasons for that. But the words were just beautiful, and I took some of those words and I kind of edited them in this way and that way, and I maybe added some phrases here or subtracted some phrases there and there. And I sent the whole piece back to Richard. And I don't remember at that point whether or not I included any, an attempt to write a haiku with that. I may have, but in any event, we both ended up working on the prose bit. We both ended up working on the haiku bit, and we both ended up. I think I suggested the title "Disaster Wireless," but Richard, I
Mhm.
think you liked it, and so that was so that
Right.
was it got your thumbs up as well, and so that's kind of in a nutshell, I think how this came about. So Richard, why don't you add your bit here?
Okay. Let's see if I can switch my screen a minute. Um, no.
What? What do you want to do?
Oh, it's just here on the let's see, shared content, just a moment. View, okay, here, side by side. Okay, gallery,
Well,
multi-speaker.
got to
Yeah,
Zap.
I haven't used three-way Zoom in a while, but okay, here I am. Okay, Edith, I'd like to mention uh, Jennifer's talent as a poet in the realm of uh, contemporary poetry, haiku, haibun, and just a prose poem. So I co-founded the Helios Sparrow Poetry Journal with Clayton Beach, who's in Portland, Oregon. So I think now we're about over 4 years ago. And Jennifer started sending material, I think almost 3 years ago. And, we've published 120 of her pieces, at least that. And so I was really familiar with her work from, that she had sent. And so through these years, I usually, I don't communicate, I don't have personal communication as the editor with people sending work. But, over time, a short conversation developed. And then at one point, I said, well, I'd like to send you something, or, she sent me something. And we developed what would you call it, a Google Drive space.
Ah,
And I think that space has actually turned out to be really important. And this is all happening in this virtual space, which is an interesting space. And I like contemplating ma, or the sense of betweenness, or you could call it an interval of space and time that consciousness seems to be activated into through disjunction or through, a poetic metaphor. And I think Jennifer is quite brilliant at in that very short space and time of haiku of metaphorical shifting that brings you into new imagery and kind of pops a new world into being. So anyway, it's long-winded, but I have a great respect for her work and her, her mind and sensitivity. Her, I would say, the sense of feeling, which is pretty difficult. It's pretty difficult to have a really strongly activated sense of emotional tone in very short form poetry. And I think that her work is quite unique, and she has pointed out through her work a way of expressing that. So I mean, I kind of had a feeling in the background, but at the same time, for myself, a lot of my writing I do is in either in letter forms or dream communication, like hypnagogic, or odd, what's that called? The default neural network. It's kind of when you're spaced out and daydreaming. And I write stuff, and it's poetic prose, or it's incomplete. And I think that these were the things I was interested to share with Jennifer, because I didn't know what to do with them. They didn't seem to have a form. They didn't fit into any the exact category. And I just was started. I think this is one of the things I sent in that original form, which is longer. And as she said, I felt something about it, because it's about the land that I've been living on and for I think about 16 years now. And I have woods. It's a 80-year-old hinoki trees, and before that, it had dawn or it's leveled, terraced mountainside. It's a dormant volcano. And for Japan, it's a lot of land, a few acres, and it's all woods, and it's just needs to be maintained and tended, actually. And I know the family who owned it for some generations. And yeah, I'm in the woods a lot and develop some kind of relationship, I think, with the woods. And the poem, I don't know if we should read it, but maybe, or at least the people can read it online. The poem reflects this experience of the community I live in, which is a very small farming village. We're up high, so the main product here is nashi, They call it Japanese pear or something. I'm not sure. Nashien is an orchard. They're kind of like tended mini apple trees, and they bag the early fruit, the budding fruit, in bags and tie them off so bugs don't get in. And it takes a lot of care.
Why
They're
don't you,
also
why
yeah.
don't the two of you read the poem here for everyone, and then we can go into the explanations of the various parts of it, because you're getting into the meat of it.
Okay. How
And-
Sure.
about if Jennifer reads the poem, the prose, and I'll read the haiku?
Or actually, what I was thinking,
Or
that's fine, but what I was
or
thinking is, I'll start by reading the title, and then we'll just alternate
okay.
paragraphs, so to speak.
Okay.
Does that work?
That's
Sure.
It makes it a little closer to how the audio that is published with the poem in Rattle sounds, just a little bit closer. But
by the way, underneath this video will be a link to the poems,
okay.
so people can listen to them and get the full experience from both Rattle and whatever the other one is. Okay,
Sure.
Sure.
give it a shot.
Disaster Wireless.
Broadcast from the village loudspeakers far away, like a scratchy 1940s radio. A language for bees or aliens. The nashi in the village orchards are coming into their sweetness. Half the farmers are retired or dead, long lives swallowed by the soil.
There's no war in the forest, just trees disordered in their own way. Steep hills, sculpted terraces, old stone walls bedded in volcanic loam. The echo of chisels, weaponry would be inhuman.
I tend these woods like the man before me, subtracting myself from Inoshishi trails, sightlines the doves fly through. The forest breeze all the time, shifting, familiar, yet ever distant.
Cicada susurrus, an alphabet of evening bells.
Love that. I don't know where to start in this one. Of course, you may not know, but I live in the middle of a forest.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've got about 6 acres of old oak trees and pines, and so I get this. And we have nothing but farms and stuff around us. I live in the middle of nowhere. From a Detroit boy, spent my life in Wayne County, Michigan, and Detroit. When we retired, we moved up here. So I have a total understanding. And there's interesting. Talk to me about the title, Disaster Wireless. Where did that come from?
Yeah, that Jennifer came up with that, and I really love the title actually, but I'll let her talk about it.
Well, I'll start, but I think you should probably finish. Disaster Wireless. So in the first paragraph of the prose, well, I should say the first paragraph of the prose begins, broadcast from the village loudspeakers far away, like a scratchy 1940s radio, a language for bees and aliens. And then there's a little bit of a cut to the next bit. The nashi and the village orchards are coming into their sweetness. But that first bit about the broadcast from the village loudspeakers far away like a scratchy 1940s radio, a language for bees or aliens. Well, what is that? What is broadcast? What is that sound that is, a language for bees or aliens? It must, it's something strange, some strange sound. And Richard, here is where I feel so the disaster wireless reference actually refers to that sound. And here, Richard, is where I think you should probably pick up the thread, because you've kind of lived with this in a way that I clearly have not.
Okay. I think that one of the way I respond to how the writing came to be is that it's really grounded. It's just grounded in my experience. And of course, there are loudspeakers in the trees, but where we live in far away from the center of the village, so actually you can never understand what, this is typical of villages in Japan, that there are loudspeakers, and they do warn of disasters. Like we just had a typhoon that came through, a big one, for 2 days, and there it just at 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning, or 10 at night, or earthquake warning. Japan is just chock full of disaster. Between the volcano, we live around 3 active volcanoes here, right where I am. I mean, I can drive 5 minutes and look at one. So these loudspeakers are important for historically, and the age of the area does have this feeling of casting back to the war, casting back to I said retired or dead farmers, because things are changing here, and the young people aren't moving in, and the young people don't want to be out here farming at all. It's a big issue, in Japan, population decrease in the demographically.
It's a big issue here in the United States too. What's
Yeah.
happening here.
And,
That's
and
important too for people to understand that you are in Japan. I forgot to make that simple distinction. Jennifer, in the U.S., you're in Japan. That makes this collaboration even more interesting, because you've managed to connect your images, even though what you're looking at may not be identical.
sure, but again, the thing that really strikes me about this piece as it currently stands is I feel the depth of emotion that Richard actually has for these woods, and which, Richard, you've written in other in other correspondence to me and other messages to me, that you and your woods have an agreement. You get along with your woods, but it's more than that. You really love these woods, and I just feel that warmth and that heart coming through this prose. And even in the second paragraph of the prose, there's no war in the forest, just trees disordered in their own way. It's brilliant. Steep hills, sculpted terraces, old stone walls bedded in volcanic form, the echo of chisels. I think you mentioned something in your message with the sort of the prototype, if you will, of this prose, Richard, but about chisels. But I think the echo of chisels is, as a phrase, was something I edited in. And then you had written this next bit in so many words, and the next words are very close, I think, to your original words. Weaponry would be inhuman. And so connected up with whatever kind of wartime disasters, in addition to whatever natural disasters may have befallen Japan and may befall Japan. There is this idea of being in this deeply embracing kind of forest, this deeply embracing kind of woods, where weaponry would be inhuman. And that, to me, I think, is the line, so to speak, that really sells this piece in a way. I think that's the line that if we've been descending deeper and deeper and deeper into sort of the soul of the writing, from the title on down through the first paragraph, on down through the second paragraph, we get to weaponry would be inhuman, and we know we are actually in the sort of heart, I'll say the heart of the beast, and not the belly of the beast, but the heart of the beast in this piece. It just really is so tender and at the same time so raw and so real.
I'll tell you what I liked in this section. Just trees disordered in their own way. That's a contradiction. They're disordered, but they went where they wanted to be. They are where they are, where they want to be, and where they live. But to us, we look at things as disordered. We say, well, that tree shouldn't be over here. We should put, when we do a garden, we like to plant everything in a row. And that, well, if you saw my garden, you would realize wherever the seeds land, I'm cool with it.
Yeah.
And
And
so
that,
I immediately bought that whole little section, and that made a big deal. And you started with no war, and you capped that section with weaponry would be inhuman. It's like, if we could only figure out if we could just be like the forest, we could all be different and disordered in our own way.
right. And
That's
still
how I
harmonious.
took it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and still harmonious. And actually, I want to just say that line, just trees disordered in their own way, trees disordered in their own way. That's 100% Richard Gilbert right there.
I might have been able to guess that.
Funny.
Yeah,
Funny.
yeah. I didn't, when I was quote unquote editing this, I didn't have to touch that, in the least. So.
But what part of that section was uniquely yours, Jennifer?
The prose, the prose, again, like I said, the prose lifted itself up out of Richard's email, just as, and Richard, you had said that you thought this might have been sort of hypnagogic writing. And I don't think this, at least this part in this message that you had sent me didn't have that feel. It may have been, but it certainly didn't have that feel. What I remember of that message is that this bit had, just sort of a feel of you just kind of telling me about the woods, in this particular way. And so all of this prose about the woods that Richard had sent me just kind of, sort of raised itself off the page. I mean, it was an odd kind of sensation, but it really was very real. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is just beautiful. And I sort of took it and edited some stuff out that's not in here, and maybe changed a little bit of stuff that is in here. So I actually couldn't tell you which of this, looking at this text now, which of this is sort of what I added in, if that makes sense. But I do remember editing down somewhat and basically making, to begin with, making sort of I'll say almost like a blackout poem of Richard's prose, which was actually something that Richard, I had done, I think, before we worked on, before we started working on this haibun. I had, something else you had written me, I had thought was a similar sort of beautiful piece of prose, and I kind of edited it down to a blackout poem. And I remember sending it to you with some trepidation, thinking, okay. And you wrote back and said, oh, I love that blackout poem. And I think that actually may have become our haibun Parting Rude, but I'm not certain of that. It may have been a different piece. But so Mike, I wish I could answer your question more specifically, except to say that I believe that the I think I added some things in maybe in the third paragraph of prose. I know I tend these woods like the man before me is very, very close to something Richard had written in the message. I think I changed the idea, or sort of, he had written something about Inishishi trails and sight lines and so forth. And I added the kind of idea of subtracting myself from Inishishi trails, sight lines the doves fly through. I believe I kind of added that idea of subtracting myself, because at that point in the piece, I remember feeling like, okay, this piece is really about this woods and this very special relationship between the author, and in my mind, this was mainly Richard, and his relationship with the woods, his very special relationship between Richard and the woods. And so it needs to be more about the woods, or primarily about the woods, very much less about the authorial voice or the poetic eye. In German we say das poetische Ich, but the poetic eye, the poetic speaker. So I tend these woods like the man before me, subtracting myself from Inoshishi trails. And Inoshishi they are the wild boar, right, Richard?
Yeah, they're
Around you, yeah.
they're prevalent.
Yeah.
And those trails are random. They're not they match the disorder of the forest.
Yeah.
When I put them right together, because disordered in their own way, and those trails, they don't have a fixed pattern. It's and so everything you're describing is something that's happened naturally and on its own without anyone interfering. And
Right.
the
Yeah.
weaponry that would be inhuman might be a saw, might be a
Could
gun.
be. Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, I often go into the woods with it's called a kusa kariki, which is I think they might be illegal in the U.S., but it's basically you strap on a 4-point harness with a gas engine on a long shaft with a saw blade at the end spinning really fast. I mean, literally, so, it's a circular saw blade, 255 millimeters wide with big teeth, like in front of you, and you're basically, the way I look at it is you're sowing death. I mean, you're just, it's loud. I've got earplugs in, and a lot of working in the woods is pretty noisy like that, and you're just savagely eliminating things that would choke off. It would the brush and that grows up prevents animals from walking through, including humans, and it gets really close to the trees, and then it rubs on their bark, and they can get disease from that. And there's airflow and things. And I've learned that. I learned from a Japanese gardener, quote unquote gardener. Japanese gardeners here do all sorts of things, and he taught me how to maintain the woods, over some time. He's a friend of mine too, and it was very interesting how he perceived the space. And I think that this attitude is a little bit different than I was used to as nature versus human managed nature. There's actually a book by, I'm not sure if his name is Jack Turner, called The Abstract Wild, which talks about this idea of, nature as managed, or the abstract idea of nature versus like how things work. I would say in the ethos here, the idea of maintaining a woods is very harmonious. It's a very harmonious idea that there is this relationship where the human isn't abstracted from the environment, and the environment isn't really abstracted from the human, but we both are what we are. Like, I'm not, it reminds me of the Basho epithet, or so-called epithet, like, if you want to know the pine, go to the pine. I feel like, well, I don't know that I'm really doing that. But I do feel that this feeling of stepping out of something and into something else, that I'm a guest, but it's just so continuous through the seasons. Like 16 years with these woods and 27 years in Kumamoto, Japan. Yeah, there's some resonance for me in my heart, but at the same time, the loudspeakers are in the trees, not in the woods here, but a little further away. And I suppose there's a way in which the woods aren't in some wild, like, Yellowstone Park area or whatever you'd say, out in the, far Alaska, or in, et cetera. They're just in a village not that far from town.
no,
And so there's this sort of penetration of all those layers of history through the land itself that's been reshaped, through earlier farming, that then the terracing faded back over generations back into the land, but it's still sort of visible, that kind of thing. So anyway, about the poem itself, I think something important to mention is that when Timothy Green had selected this as an accepted submission, I remember he had an issue in Rattle, which was about collaborative poetry, or how that was the theme. And he wrote, remember, Jennifer, he wrote and said who wrote what. He wanted to put.
that's what I asked.
Yeah, he wanted to indicate that. And we didn't really even need to discuss it ourselves. We said it's blended. We can't tell anymore who wrote what. Jennifer came up with the title, and I actually think that she had the haiku is definitely, she wrote the main conception of that haiku. I think so. But then, with the haiku, we've done a lot of work with haiku in Renku or in other, we have a bunch of other stuff that we've been messing around with and finished pieces and that. And so the thing about haiku is that, you can change one little particle or one, position in it or the line. And, we're just often going back and forth with very, subtle, nuanced changes. And I'm sure that there was some of that in this one. And so in the end, it was easy to say right away to Timothy, no, we can't, it doesn't work like that, And the reason I think that it was easy for me to say that is because over many, many iterations of editing and since it's a virtual space, we're not actually talking. I don't think we ever went online, like on a Zoom meeting, to talk about this ever.
No,
It's all done through a Word doc in the virtual space, and then some writing little comments or changing something and saying, I did this, take a look. And that kind of maybe answers some of your question of process, And I also think that it's important to say that we trust each other. We developed, we have respect for each other just as people and as poets. And I would say another thing too, maybe the other poem, if we get to that, the Parting Rude poem, has more intimacy or more, direct, emotional, raw intimacy. And it might be something we're saying that we're different ages, we're different genders, we have different life experiences. But I feel that I know Jennifer through her poetry, and I think she knows me through mine also. And we have some interesting connections there, interesting ways of flowing with metaphor and things we appreciate somehow deeply. And I think we're able to express that I think the word safety is correct. And I don't mean a safe space like not taking a risk, because when you're talking about maybe it's sexuality or romance or whatever, you're putting yourself out there in a pretty raw way. But I think that this genre of haibun, of renku, of linking, it has a way of really allowing tremendous intimacy, and at the same time, it's accessible. The metaphors are accessible to each other.
Well,
It's hard to explain that actually, but I think this poem reflects our process very, very well.
Well, I think part of it is that what you said. I want to clarify something for some people. Google Drive is a wonderful toy. That's how I do it with other people, because time doesn't matter. Your time zone, you just got up and we're going to be going to bed in a couple hours. You can operate. So I can operate with somebody in India or in Ireland. I've done a little bit with Roberta Beery. I've done an awful lot with Kelly Moyer. And you hit the word. You have to trust people, because it's not like a relationship, but a relationship over a poem requires the same amount of trust. In other words, you're not going to muck up my ace here, or I'm not going to have to argue with you about the words, word choices. We're going when you have that flow with somebody. Kelly and I have done thousands of poems together.
I would just, not to
That's how
interrupt
that
too much,
works.
but I think that we do argue sometimes, but it's always interesting because that's the difference in our minds, right? And so I think there's a feeling of synergy underneath that, like whatever Jennifer is thinking, I may not, it may change again later, actually, anyway. But it's good that's the wonder of a good collaboration, I think, is I want to know what she likes and doesn't like about something I put out there, and vice versa. And this is like when I sent her this writing, and yeah, this wasn't a dream writing. This was, I wanted to write about these woods. I heard the noise of the loudspeakers, and I thought, it's just so odd. I think this is a unique situation here. How can I express it? I did this writing, and I think, yes, my intention in sending the original writing, which was longer and definitely not as beautiful and tight, I feel, and that's a compliment. It's not just my thing. What Jennifer picked up in it, as she said, what lifted her or what she felt lifted out of the page was something that I'm not able to recognize. That experience was, as a poet, it's really hard to know really precisely what is really good about something that you've done and what maybe could get X'd out. And I think of like the famous example of T.S. Eliot and Pound, because, Ezra chopped away at the wasteland savagely, right? It's just like brush cutting. I don't know, exactly what we would call it, but I think it was reduced by 2/3 or some large amount, and we have this beautiful poem as a result. And I think Jennifer did, some cutting, chopping, rearranging, added her. She felt where there were little bit gaps in the flow, and yet it is still large. It's almost that she was able to help me say something of my own experience much better than I was able to do it in.
How about you, Jennifer? How did you feel about that? What Richard just said. Are you in sync now?
I agree. I think I agree with everything Richard said. It sounds familiar. Yeah, I'd like to take a step back and address this sort of topic, I guess, of the kind of a collaborative relationship here. And yes, Richard, you mentioned trust. Mike, you mentioned trust, and it's totally trust is so important because writing is very intimate, and you have to be. It takes a lot of courage to write, and it takes, I think, even more courage to write when you know that someone else, one person in particular, is going to read what you've written. And Richard is, I think, one of the most astute readers of poetic texts around. And there is nothing I can't send him that he won't be able just to absolutely not only, sort of understand the point of, but really understand layer and layer and layer and layer beneath that, to really unearth what is sort of going on, in the text, but certainly in the mind and the heart and the soul of the person who wrote the text. And that a lot of that is actually how I came to write my most recent haiku collection, but that's a whole other conversation.
It is. It's worthwhile. I will tell people.
But
a link to that.
But I mention it because had Richard not pointed out a lot of what was going on beneath all of these poems that are in this collection, I might not actually have put them together in the collection. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. But so we've developed through the ether, through the email space, the virtual space, the Google Drive space, this I would say, kind of openness where like I can drop a poem in or an edit in and with a comment saying, maybe we could nudge this in this direction. What I've written here is not quite right, but it may be sort of in the right kind of direction to what might actually be right, and Richard can write back and say, well, no, maybe not, maybe this instead, or yeah, okay, yeah, let's work with that. I mean, and so it's, it's you have to have that kind of openness and that kind of freedom to know that what you write isn't going to be ridiculed, it's not going to be laughed at, it's not going to be chopped down, in order really to make a collaboration. I mean, it's all about building something up, right? And sometimes building something up means we build it this way, and sometimes we take the blocks down and build it another way. But it's never about just sort of disparaging the blocks.
Right.
And I think that's a really important point because when it comes to writing with emotional depth, and Richard, you were sort of talking about the emotional depth. Um, I think of some of my writing when it comes to writing with emotional depth, it can be very scary, actually. And I think more scary when you know that you're writing and you will be sending this to the one person who you know is going to respond in some way to it,
Mhm.
to you, you know. Um, and so it's this piece, Disaster Wireless, all you know, all of our pieces have come out of that kind of, yes, mutual respect, but I mean, I think just a deep concern, I would say, for the soul of the other poet.
I
And
think that's the hardest thing to establish, actually, with between people sometimes, is because there's a there's a tendency. We all love what we wrote. It's just a natural thing. I mean, poets are that way. But when you find people who you can feel comfortable with, and it is about trust, because you don't want somebody to hammer you to death. There are some
right,
people who will do that. Yeah, I can't. That's not a collaboration. That's a you're beating my poem into yours, kind of thing. And
right.
it seems like you've had this flow, but I don't want to ignore the poem at the end. Can we
Mhm.
take a look at that one? Because that second line is a killer. Whoever wants to take that one, whichever one.
I, I think Jennifer, when Jennifer put that in, sorry, as you know, as I said, we worked on that haiku, but I think it's like largely what she wrote to begin with.
Oh, the
And,
haiku.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's I think an alphabet of evening bells is Jennifer's line for sure, and it's just beautiful. It's just and it's also has the wonderful contrast where it both links into the prose section and also is completely its own thing. And with the bees and the aliens and the loudspeaker and the wireless, it this aspect of language, like the language of the natural world, the language of the human world. Do, you know, do the woods speak to us? Do they speak to us in a language, or have we lost that ability or that cultural contact with the natural world to where it's nature is silence only? That's a question. I think that's a good question for the haiku world. Is um, it's in eco criticism that's there are essays on that aspect of language and nature. It's pretty interesting.
Well, in the poem, I get a kick out of the fact that you've got the cicada, and I don't know this, but the evening bells. There's the connection, and it's an interesting thing, and it's sort of like uh, and just like a broadcast, uh, cicada. And why did you choose the word susurrus? Tell me how that one came about, Jennifer.
So I think that word is actually Richard's.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I
I
can't
think
remember.
I
I
think the
can't remember.
cicada susurrus maybe I had in, but it wasn't a haiku, right? It was just in the text.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm sure that the Susurrus or Susurrus was yours, and the cicadas may have been too. I kind of feel like
Yeah,
maybe I had put cicadas something else, or maybe the
I think
cicadas are
so. I think
yours.
so. See, this is the thing we don't
But
really remember.
we don't really remember. I mean, we have the emails, I'm sure,
Yeah, dig it
but
all out.
and of course, the evening bells, of course, bring us back to the disaster wireless, because is it not
Right.
the case, Richard, that the wireless, the same wireless system that broadcasts the emergency notifications and so forth,
Mhm.
broadcasts these, what is it, 6 o'clock Friday evening bells? Am I getting that right, Richard?
Yeah, it's the really goofy, actually it sounds like scratchy 1940s, like some some little clip of some old Enka song, go and it's like the 6 a.m. wake up and then the 5 p.m. They're not bells, but I would say that the alphabet of evening bells for me, it has this very slight resonant, or not slight, but just a resonant nuance or atmosphere of chapel bells, of the monastery bells.
Mhm.
And I think that it's like a little fairy dust gets sprinkled over the feeling of the woods and the whole poem in a way. It's a little blessing at the end. And we have a lot of different cicadas here. I grew up in Connecticut, and we just had the really loud, the ones here, they're called kumazemi here, the super loud chainsaw-like ones, Kuma is bear, so it's actually they're bear cicadas. But we have like 12 different varieties, and they're born and die in these different little segments of the summer.
Mhm.
And there is right now an evening bell cicada, and that actually is really accurate by coincidence or
I
synchrony.
didn't know that.
Oh yeah, yeah, and they're very bell-like, and the late dusk, so it actually fits so well into the poem.
It's
And
like there's an alphabet of evening bells is sort of like the alphabet word. The word is a perfect choice.
isn't it? Yeah,
It's like there's a language that we don't know that's being
yeah,
spoken by the cicada. It's being spoken by the forest. It's being spoken by the birds. We're just passing through and saying, "Oh, isn't that nice?" We're
Yeah.
listening to it like it's music. It's the conversation that's occurring in the forest naturally.
right. And an
Mhm.
alphabet is what we use to make the words. It's something almost beneath language. It's an alphabet we don't know, really. I
So,
think,
so
it's a mystery in it.
with yes, definitely mystery, and with the alphabet, what I kind of like now, or I'll say appreciate now about the use of that word, and it's almost a year. It's been almost a year since we wrote the piece. Is, as you were saying, Richard, it's the alphabet is sort of the tools that makes the words, that makes the communication. But I'm looking at the first paragraph of prose toward the end. Half the farmers are retired or dead.
Mhm.
And I believe I actually added long lives swallowed by the soil. I think
Mhm.
that line is maybe mine,
Mhm.
but I'm sure inspired by something that you wrote, Richard. And then the second paragraph of prose is this discussion of there being no war in the forest. But the work, there's still some traces of the human work: steep hills, sculpted terraces, old stone walls bedded in volcanic loam, the echo of chisels. And so there we have, all we hear the echo of all of these farmers who are retired or dead, and how they worked the land, how they loved the land, how they left their effect on the land in one way or another. But in all of these ways, the steep hills, the sculpted terraces, the old stone walls bedded in volcanic loam, there's a sort of gracefulness about them. I'm sort of thinking of, like, Frank Lloyd Wright sort of building a house into a hill or
Mhm.
something like that, or building a waterfall into, into the house itself. There really is this relationship, and the alphabet as the tools that the poets here use to tell this tale, the alphabet as the tools, a metaphor maybe for the tools that the farmers who have worked the land, and now, now one of the poets himself, Richard, who is sort of working the land in his own way, are using. It all kind of ties together. But the thing I think I like most and appreciate most about this poem is, or this whole haibun, I should say, is that this title is at once, it starts the haibun in a way that it opens the door on the haibun, of course, but it opens, but then when you start reading the text, you realize, wait a minute, I went through a different door.
Mhm.
And so there is this, I'll say, disjuncture, I think a very nice degree of disjuncture between
Mhm.
the title and the rest of the piece. which, yes, of course, refers back, is sort of opened up by the whole idea of this disaster wireless, this disaster kind of broadcast notification system in Japan. But at the same time, it doesn't really have much to do directly with it. And I think that is one of the things that, when I look back at all of the collaborations you and I, Richard, have done, all of the Tanrenga we've done, all of the Renge we've done, all of the Haibun we've done, and actually poems and other genres as well. We both are super comfortable with a lot of Ma, if I can put it that way. And that's really super exciting. I think we've come up with some sparks there.
Hey,
That
I
yeah.
I wonder if we have enough time to read the other poem,
Yes, I was just about to say, let's
because it's a different.
we've had a good discussion about process and about how you did this one. Let me back out and we'll find the other one here. Hang on a minute and I'll pull
And
it.
also, just add a last comment onto what Jennifer said.
Go ahead.
I do think that, like, when I saw her title for, Disaster Wireless, I really just thought it was brilliant. It just encapsulated something strange and evocative. Like, you want, what's going on here, and then it leads into the first line, the beginning of the first line of the loudspeakers. But as Jennifer said, the door is not the door that gets opened, isn't the door you think it's going to be. And so, in a way, the haiku at the end has this, the way it links and shifts is important and adds something. But also, the title is in its own way doing something similar at the beginning. So,
Yeah. I think what you guys have done, what the two of you have managed to do, is take a thought of Richard's that came across in an email and turn it into a haibun.
Yeah, exactly.
By going back and forth in Google Docs,
Yeah.
and where you can comment. People need to understand you can comment there, and you can erase comments, you can edit, you can do all kinds of things, and you can go backwards if you make a change and don't like it. One of the joys of Google is it remembers everything, so you can move back to and say, boy, we sort of messed it up while we were fooling around with it. Let's go back to the original. That happens.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thing, but I want to move on to the next one. Go ahead.
I would like to just say very, very briefly, with this, I don't think requires a lot of discussion. For Disaster Wireless, it's for every poem, I think, that's published in Rattle. Eventually, I think Tim asked the poet to record him or herself, or in our case, themselves, reading the poem. And so the audio that is posted, as you can see there, with the haibun. Actually, you'll hear both my voice and Richard's voice in this audio, and we collaborated, of course, on that as well. You may or may not know that Richard is a professional audio engineer, and in fact, Richard, you are sitting now in your studio. So when Tim Green asked us, would you make a recording, of yourselves reading this? Of course, I wrote, and I should say I'm a professional radio producer and radio broadcaster. So I wrote Richard and said, okay, why don't you read the whole thing, record yourself reading the whole thing, send me the file, I'll record myself reading the whole thing, and then I'll sort of mash them together, And so that's what we did. And I think I sent it back to you and you, Richard, and you said, well, we could also do it this way. And I've tried it that way, it's slightly different. And I sent it to you and you said, no, I think we like the first way. So anyway, that was a relatively quick collaboration, but across thousands of miles, thanks to the grace of technology.
Right.
Both of us there. So
yeah, that this is excellent. I would be doing this with you. It caught me, and it just where I live, you guys captured my world too.
Wow.
And I have nothing to do with creating this. You did it for me, so I felt pretty
Wonderful.
good about that.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. Let's switch here real quick. I gotta stop this share and pop another one in.
Okay.
Real quick. And let's see.
Now, Richard, I'm trying to remember how this one really came about. I mean, obviously it was collaborative. We used the Google Drive and so forth, but do you recall how Parting Rude first uh first kind
I
of
I don't I don't exactly remember. Was it originally something? Was it the seed form came from your writing?
I think it may have. I feel I'm not sure about this, but I feel like most of the prose is mine.
It
Is
had
that
there's certain thematic story aspect that really feels like you in
I
in the piece for sure.
I don't
Like
want to I don't
I
want to
am
claim to,
barbed vines you cannot reach. I mean that's yeah that's I mean I there's a key sort of key imagery in the piece that's very much I think your imagery that comes from you. If yeah.
yeah, I am barbed vines you cannot reach. You are dew slipping through my fingers. Yeah, I don't
Hmm.
and I do remember many rings ago you brought with you the woods. We had a whole long back and forth about that bit, but yeah, so I don't want to take more credit than I
Right. I remember that. I remember that. Yeah.
but I think that most of the prose might have originated as mine.
Yeah.
And I do believe that in this case the haiku is mostly yours.
Yeah, I think in a way this is a mirror image. It's a blended work, but it's kind of a mirror image where it's a coming through the prose is coming through your experience, more, or you could say quote unquote autobiographical or memoirish, but in a poetic way, let's say. And yeah, I did more the haiku, and I think you did the title actually.
We well, you know,
We talked about rude a lot. Like
we
we looked
talked
up the
about
etymology of that.
right, we looked up the etymology of it and we bounced around several titles.
Yeah, let's read it. Let's read it.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Why don't you read?
So how do you want to do this,
I'll
Richard?
I'll read the title this time, and then you read the prose. I'll do the coup.
Okay.
Okay. Parting rude.
Seasons pace in pilgrim steps. Small trees grow between breaths, braid the living and the dying, branch from the body unnoticed to unrepentant ground. Sun slips into negative space, our skin shames silent. Devilish briar grows within. I am barbed vines you cannot reach. You are dew slipping through my fingers. Many rings ago, you brought with you the woods, entangled, choked. Each year, new brush, weeds, silence where light should lick the forest floor. Echoes of a chorus we refuse to hear. Some things are fine to leave.
Inside the circle, outside the circle, embers.
I love it. Tell me a little bit about the title. Just tell me how related.
Richard, you wanna take this one?
I'd have to look it up again, honestly. Um, I think that it was interesting to look at we looked at the the Christian definitional aspect of the word, but also pre-Christian or pagan aspect also. We talked about Scandinavia, and
Mhm.
there's this whole historical etymology, but I think we should try to get the actual definition because I don't think
Yeah.
it's a word that most people know.
I
Uh,
have a quick definition here. A measure, a rood is a measure of land. This is sort of a historical definition. A rood is a measure of land equal to a quarter of an acre. And so here in this haibun, we're not obviously so much concerned about whether it's a quarter of an acre or what have you, but it is this earthiness. It is this bit of earth. And clearly there is there is this relational aspect to to the prose. I am barbed vines you cannot reach. You are dew slipping through my fingers. Um, let's see, echoes of many rings ago, you brought with you the woods entangled, choked, each year new brush, weeds, silence where light should lick the forest floor. Echoes of a chorus we refuse to hear. Some things are fine to leave. And so there is this sort of earthiness, and there also is this kind of relational dimension, which is a little bit, I mean, there's sand in the flesh of the oyster here, right? To yet another metaphor. And so this piece really is about kind of parting and earthiness and
You
Well,
had me pretty
also,
early in this one
oh,
because
cool.
the the pilgrim steps, and then you've got small trees grow between breaths.
Mm.
And I always think to myself when I'm walking in the forest, I am inhaling oxygen, I am exhaling CO2. The trees and the growth around me are just taking in the CO2 and giving back oxygen. It's a wonderful symbiotic relationship that we don't pay much attention to when you're walking through a forest, particularly if you're in a hurry. It's the end of the day. At the end of my walk, I'm done. I got to get back to the car. Got to get home. Got to have dinner. I'm not paying attention to it.
yeah.
When you stop
Yeah.
and slow down,
Yeah. Mm.
funny thing happens. And
Well,
it,
there's a feeling of weaving in rhythm one thing through another, and it's the rhythm of the words, the rhythmic phrasing. I think exemplifies that feeling of between the breaths and braiding the living and dying. But as well, I think it's important to mention that the archaic meaning of rood was that it's the cross on which Jesus was crucified. And so, the first words there, season's pace and pilgrim steps, is really for me very key. Oh, and it's an interesting side topic, which is how do you weave in a sense of the spiritual, or um, relate, analogize, or present that atmosphere of religious path or pattern history, which is really deep in our Western soul. And I mean, I don't come from a Christian background in one way, but in another way, I'm reading that book Dominion right now by Tom Holland, and it's it's so clear that some depth of values that I know innately almost come from that, the Enlightenment and Judeo-Christian background that is so deeply rooted. And so I think it's interesting to have chosen that title and indicated, like, I am barb vines, the barb vines and the devilish briar and things like that. I feel that the echo of the Christian history and that title, the rood, is really important in that way to add a layer, let's say, without you know what I mean, without overstating anything. Yeah.
Over-interpreting.
I,
Yeah.
I love, I am barbed vines you cannot reach. You are dew slipping through my fingers. Wow. That was so, that is such a, I don't know. It's on the one hand, I don't know. It's just that caught me. It just that spoke to me about uh, the way you can have a relationship and be totally different and have
Mhm.
different reactions within it. And the many rings you brought with you, the woods. I mean, entangled, choked. I just and it gets back to these two are related. These two haibun we're talking about are related in the sense that they're all tied with this love of nature and understanding that we're just a small part of something that's much, much larger than us, much bigger than a forest. Maybe it's the size of a universe. What do you think? It's just, it's really cool.
You know, I will say, I I don't approach, I'm just speaking for myself. I don't generally approach my work as a poet from a position of sort of a nature lover, though of course I do love nature and try to do what I can to protect nature. Um, you know, I tend, I tend to write, when writing feels right to me, I know that it is coming from very, very, very deep within. So in the first line of this place, excuse me, of this haibun, small trees grow between breaths. And I understand what you were saying, Mike, from a few minutes ago about, how when you're in the forest, you literally are breathing the breath of the trees, so to speak. That was really not part of what I had in mind with
Good.
that line. I mean,
Good.
it can certainly be read that way. So I'm not saying your reading is wrong. Don't get me wrong.
There's no reading that's wrong. Ever.
Right, correct. So, but where I'm coming from, and I think Richard, you kind of touched on it a little bit when you said there's sort of an interweaving kind of idea throughout the piece. With the small trees growing between breaths, I mean the small tree, like if you could imagine the breath of sort of one person, but also the breath of sort of a whole humankind's worth of people, a collective breath. And in that, in between these collective breaths, the trees can grow, and then there's a collective breath, and then more trees grow. I mean, I'm thinking of this on a sort of almost universal scale, right?
Mhm.
Braid, the living and the dying branch from the body unnoticed to unrepentant ground, and then sun slips into negative space. So there's that sort of braiding, that sort of interweaving kind of idea that, as Richard, I think you put it, our skin, sun slips into negative space, our skin shamed, silent, devilish briar grows within. And so that's very much a connection of the outer world, the natural world, outside the human body, within the sort of the skin of the human body, inside the skin of the human body. I am barbed vines you cannot reach, you are dew slipping through my fingers, and then the rest we've read. But so I feel like this is not really, honestly, as much natural imagery as there is. I don't look at this honestly as a nature poem. I look at this actually as sort of a very, very deep manifestation of a kind of relational sense that is primordial, that connects people. And sometimes, I mean, and this is the beauty of poetry, sometimes you like words really actually do fail us. Words are wonderful, but they have their limits and limitations. And so when you find yourself reaching for words in such a way as you have to use them to create some other picture with them, then you know that if you're doing that successfully, you're saying something actually really, really probably quite profound. At least I've found that to be the case in the great poems. Maybe I'm just kind of repeating the obvious. I don't know, but I think that it's an important point to make about metaphor and the power of metaphor, particularly for the haikai crowd,
Mhm.
which tends to be kind of sort of shoot away from metaphor,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there's absolutely nothing wrong with metaphor. So
I, 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 I mean, we are so totally on the same page there, and I think it shows in the style of the work, which I want to say for myself, I avoided haibun just for years. That I just found the prose of almost all the haibun I was reading, this going back maybe some years, but it's just pedestrian realism. It doesn't feel elevated to me. It doesn't feel poetic, and there's so much is just a kind of like a diary statement or a literal narrative. And I just for me that it just doesn't really work for me. Now that's just my taste. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but for me, not that interesting. So the use of metaphor, but also the compression of imagery uh, when you start to unpack what a phrase is indicating or meaning, or the layers in there, I feel that this is a choice, I think, maybe an aesthetic choice, but also a way of thinking. Kind of a poetic philosophy is being expressed. Oh, and it's a very detailed, but without, it's, how would I say, where it may lead you in your imagination isn't, as Jennifer was just saying, like, it isn't really in the words. It's trying to evoke something that's just out. It's what poetry can do, right? So just outside of the language. And
Well,
I actually wrote down. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
no, go ahead, finish.
Well, just, if I don't know if it's necessary, or I could email you, but as I was thinking about having this talk together with the three of us, I was interested to try to articulate for others works that have really helped me go deeper, or go more deeply into poetic prose. And I started to reflect back on my own history, like, where does that come from? Because it's very early in my life that I was gravitated toward Counting by Jane and Phillips is like a really signature work for me. It's just this little tiny book, but it's the first kind of prose poetry that I read, and it actually is a journey of a relationship, and I recommend that. And actually, so I wrote down, I have 15 books that I actually wrote down, and with the publication dates and that, and I could send it to you. I could send you that later if you want to print it out. But I would just mention quickly, like, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard, Octavio Paz's Sunstone, that's Piedra del Sol in bilingual, Omeros by Derek Walcott. I like the Keen translation of Oku no Hosomichi, Narrow Road to Oku, by Basho. Keen's prose, not the poetry, is exquisite. And Beauty of the Husband by Anne Carson, just for instance, where you're looking at longer poems that have narratives, but the prose becomes both a story and extremely poetic. And it's in the longer forms that I find this kind of writing. So I'm not really reading other haibun that much.
This is an interesting, there's a whole other discussion we could do for 2 hours, but it is when you, the prose is a prose poem. That's what it is.
Right.
I could do the Queen's English. I know the Queen's English. Okay, I get it. But I'm not trying to tell the whole story of everything. I can see something completely different than you and Jennifer, and it's fine. And you don't have to correlate with it at all. You don't have to say, oh yeah, oh wow, you showed me something. No, I'm showing myself something. And that's what I would say is it's like Japanese painting, ink and rice paper. It's the white space. And that's what it is in the prose particularly. It's the white space. It's the things you're not telling me about, the 42 conversations you and Jennifer had via email, or all the thoughts you had that are put into it. They pop out in different places for different people. And that's the point of it. You could narrow it down and describe it completely and make this 3 fat paragraphs in the Queen's English if you wanted to. But that's not poetry.
Right.
And
yeah.
And that we're looking at the title of this one, and I don't want to lose the haiku. Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have a moment with the haiku here?
What Jennifer what were you going to say, Jennifer?
Well, I was just going to briefly say that, I think it's really important to particularly for this audience, to make the point that writing prose is hard. I mean, writing haiku, of course, has its own challenges, and a lot of us read Henderson and Higginson and Lee Gerga's book, and so on and so forth, and all the journals, and to try to kind of get a handle on, how to write haiku in English well. But writing prose prose gives you enough noose with which to hang yourself, right? You are not limited to 17 syllables. You've got a whole vast sea at your disposal. And writing prose is tricky. And I mean, I come to poetry by way of a background in classical music, but also by way of a professional background in academic writing and then also writing for the media. So by way of journalism, ultimately. And um, to ref to write really good prose takes years and years of practice and years of reading absolutely everything you can get your hands on in prose. And so everything that you mentioned, Richard, you mentioned some of your kind of key works, but I would actually say if you want to learn, here's a sort of, if you want to learn about the pine, go to the pine kind of idea. If you want to learn how to write good prose, read Toni Morrison.
Yeah.
Read like Charles Frazier's novel from 25 years or so ago, Cold Mountain. Read James McBride. Read all of these great contemporary novelists who are writing prose
Yeah.
and who know how to build a voice. I mean, if you've read Toni Morrison's Beloved, for instance, then you have that is an absolute masterclass in how to construct a voice in prose. It is absolutely stunning prose. We should aim for prose that sparkles, in our own voices in haibun, and not just sort of nice, very clear workaday prose. We should aim for literary prose in haibun.
Amen.
So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Let me toss one of mine at you, one of my favorites.
Sure.
A poet that's underappreciated, except that he won 3 Pulitzers and a Tony, is Archibald MacLeish.
Oh.
And he won the Tony for a play, a prose poem called J.B. It was written back in the late 50s. And it's about the book of Job, but it's in modern times because he's talking about nuclear war. Okay. It made it to Broadway. It was phenomenal. I saw a version of it when I was at Michigan State, and I actually played one of them roles in it.
Wow.
I was the popcorn seller. That's the devil. I call it typecasting if you want. But to write a whole play, and so some of the lines are just killer. Are those the staring stars I see, or only lights not meant for me? And this guy just did it all the time like that. And he won one of his Pulitzers is Conquistador, which is like a 39-page poem. So read him if you want to enjoy it. But what you're saying here is absolutely correct, Jennifer. If you want to understand haiku, you want to understand haibun, you have to pay attention to it, everybody's view of it. And there are some people who taught me some valuable lessons, Alexis Rotilla and Roberta Beery.
Yeah.
Roberta taught me to just have fun. And don't try and structure it anyway. And I noticed the way you've got this, you don't have capitals. And by the way, Jennifer, you do this all the time. I think it's natural. You flow from one side to the other. Sometimes you'll use punctuation. Well, by the way, and other times completely ignore it. And because it is a poem. And that's the way, by the way, if you read JB, that's the way it's written, just about the way you're writing this. So, but I want to focus on this poem. Mm-hmm. And then we'll call it quits. But I promise you, but I want to get to the poem here. Which one of you wants to take that one?
Richard, I think you should.
Okay. I think it's just a good case for intuitive leap. The concept of inside the circle, outside the circle, that it's a dialectical haiku, so-called. I made that up, but there's been several haiku that are like this where I think actually Lee Gergel wrote one a long while ago that I really like it was a relation, um, her side of it, his side of it, winter silence. I think I could be misquoting it. And there's been a
Close.
couple, the empty elevator opens period, closes period. Do you remember that one? That was in Higginson's book, I think. I just in 3 lines, like opens dot, next line closes dot. God, I can't remember. I can't remember the author's name, but there's a few of these called dialectical opposite haiku. So I think I had that kind of idea in my mind probably, but um, the many rings ago in this poem, I'm not sure how that came about. I do think that I wrote the haiku after we had already been working on this piece together for maybe it was finished or close to finished. And that many rings ago is you know, how would you call it? A kind of a language misreading, semantic confusion, right? So as if a tree life was personified instead of years ago, rings ago. So the tree rings,
Mhm.
so it's an eruptive semine, an eruptive idea there. And I feel that I wanted to pick up on that, the circle aspect, right? The rings, the circle, and that feeling of the vicious, savage ending of the relationship. It's really harsh. Um, Echoes of a chorus we refuse to hear. Some things are fine to leave. I mean, you could say that with a voice. If you're an actor, I'm really not that great a reader, but you could say that with such. You could say it with venom. You could say it with deep tears. You could be crushed and abandoned, right? But also it's like rejection, and so it's a very strong ending, and it there's a agon, there's a battle in this in some way, right? It's fierce, it's sharp, it's cutting in the feel, the emotional tone, and I think we've all been there in different ways. And so how to express that in the haiku, I not without resolving, you know.
Mhm.
And so I think that of course the embers, that's what's left after you leave in a way, or that's what the poem is. The poem is that glowing thing that is a kind of resultant burning that's still there, but it's refined, into that softer glow that, it's just you can't read by it, it's that glowing yet hot light, and kind of that purified ending that's still on fire, right? And so the dialectical oppositional part is maybe reflecting some intuitive way that agon of the poem and how it feels to be so inside the inside and so outside when you're outside, and it's just absolutely cut. And I think that's that what's called dialectical cutting, or that completely sharp uh, cut of disjunction there. Sometimes it works. Sometimes, and in this case, it seemed like there's a lot of repetition in it, right? So that's the trouble with this kind of short haiku has that oppositional style, right? It's you can just miss with too much repetition or not saying enough. And I think it's a way that a haiku like if this was by itself as a haiku, I don't think it's interesting. Okay? For
Mhm.
me. Like, no, it doesn't have the context.
Mhm.
Like inside where? What circle? What is the inside? Nothing. Embers of what? But in the context of the prose, it seems to breathe into that braiding back into the piece. So I think that's what's great about the collaborative haibun, that you
Yeah.
can do that. You can make it came about through the prose part.
Well,
I,
go ahead, Jennifer.
I'll just briefly add, yeah, I think this is fascinating to hear you talk about this, Richard. the many rings ago, you brought with you the woods. I just put in there, and I remember that we had back and forth, a few back rounds back and forth. I think you, Richard, you were saying many rings ago is okay, but like you brought with you the woods. Yeah, there was some issue with that, and I think I don't know how we resolved it. Um, but then I remember when you
And also,
would,
ring could be a married wedding ring.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. When you sent back the haiku with inside the circle, outside the circle, I remember immediately feeling like that is it. And I honestly wouldn't have been able to articulate why. The third line of the haiku, I don't remember what it was originally, but I remember that embers wasn't it.
Hmm.
And we had maybe some back and forth about that. And
Hmm.
and I suggested embers, and I remember writing, okay, embers, and your response, Richard, was embers always. I'll never forget it. It was just perfect. So that's how it ended up being embers. But I love, for all of the reasons that Richard, just mentioned, I love embers, but it wouldn't work without the inside the circle, outside the circle, and all leading up to it. Um, and embers is this sort of glowing thing, the light that you can't read by. It's a glowing flame, but it is a dying glowing flame.
Hmm.
It's just only a matter of time before it just stops. And I feel
Becomes
like
black.
that is absolutely, with everything that has come up, everything that has led up to it, I think that's the right ending. But it would never have come about had inside the circle, outside the circle not happened. And I still can't tell you why that works for me, but I think it works. I think it works for the piece.
Well, the fire pit that I have right outside my house, that's exactly how fires end. There's the inside, we have the rocks, and there's always embers that have crept out. They're on the outside. So just the image, forget about anything else or tying it to anything else. Just the image works for me, Richard.
Mm.
It would stand alone for me because I understand it for what it is.
Mhm.
But
Well,
you're absolutely
yeah,
right. Tying it
that's a
in,
good
and
point.
many rings ago, that's just a natural thing. People make that connection with the rings of the trees, and
Mhm.
it's just anyway. You guys are great. These are
Thank
these
you.
are two things, and I think that if anybody takes anything away from this, and I'm sure they will, you'll it's that this is the kind of thing. It's not doesn't necessarily have to be super magical. The two of you are not people who hung out together and went to high school together or knew each other for 22 years before you wrote a poem together. You're two people who love poetry, and you came together and said, oh, let's do this.
Mhm.
And sometimes you just have to say, let's try it. Let's do it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's exactly how it happened. But I would like to say that I do think there has to be a little bit of some magic, a little bit of magic, but I don't think that is, um, I think you can go into a collaboration with a mindset of we're going to sort of make magic. I
Yeah.
think, and I think maybe some collaborations, just because of the personalities involved or what have you, or maybe bring the magic into them more easily than others. I don't know, but I do think there does have to be a little bit of magic, and maybe what I like about working with Richard, is just that I think, we're both writing, as best we can, and sort of trying to get on each other's wavelength, but we're also willing to sort of step back and just kind of, I mean, neither of us is really in the driver's seat, right? And yet both of us are in the driver's seat, but neither of us is in the driver's seat, and so that's, I think, there's a sort of space there. Maybe that's an issue of
Mhm.
Ma, you know, there's a sort of performative space there that kind of you have to sort of be willing to kind of let go of the text enough to sort of let the magic happen. I don't know,
Like,
but but that's a key ingredient, I think, magic, however it comes about.
well, you've had a career. I was a theater major, and so that's where I fell in love with all this stuff. And it because that's another part of it is you can look at Chekhov and Ionesco, both excellent playwrights, both completely different.
Mhm.
And you know, that's the thing. Poets can come together. They do odd things. That odd things come out of it. And I think if people are willing to take it's the old risk taking thing that I think you were talking about. It's a risk in one sense, because sometimes I have tried to work with somebody and we just have to say, look, you do it your way, I do it my way. And we're not, between us, we're making a mess. We're not making poetry. But when it works, and you're right, okay, I'll go with magic, and we'll dismiss anything intellectual about it. Sometimes it is magical where you find people who just are in sync enough. And I found several of them. I've been lucky, and you can do these collaborative things and have it work. But the biggest thing is you have to try, and you have to have some basis. And yours started out with an email. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Just a simple idea in an email, and all of a sudden it became something else. But I want to thank you both.
Oh, sure.
And you've
Thank
done
you.
a marvelous thing. I'm going to shut off the recording and we'll let nature take its course.
Right.
Thank you, Mike.
But thank
Thanks
you.
a lot, Mike. I
you.
appreciate your invite.